Welcome to the show, everybody. Keith, you've got a...
Wait, hold on. Do I get to say welcome too?
Sure.
Are you the only one that gets to welcome?
Please welcome the guests.
I'd like to welcome you
Thank
to
you.
your podcast as a host.
I'm so happy
I'd
to
like
be
to
here.
welcome any listener who might be there too. Is that okay? Is that appropriate?
That's perfect. I don't know if I've ever been welcomed or the listeners before, so...
Let's shake it up.
Yeah, some big brownie points right off the bat, really.
Let's go. This is not about following a protocol. This is about discovering.
This is true.
This is about being present in this moment. And in this moment, it felt like the right thing to do.
I'm glad that you did it then.
You're welcome.
Well, now that we've had a huge win, let's talk about failure.
The big L.
The big L's.
Yeah.
One of my favorite concepts of yours is failing great. What does failing great mean?
Ooh. So we stigmatize, let me describe what it's not. We stigmatize failure. I have stigmatized failure. We carry it as some sort of badge of like embarrassment instead of what it is, which is a badge of honor. Like if we fail and actually alchemize that, if we fail and actually process that, we're unstoppable. We're meant to fail. That's my perspective.
That's interesting. What got you to that perspective where you stopped seeing failure as
I
that
just kept
as that
screwing
badge?
up. This is probably a script I created.
Yeah.
It's probably not true, and it's going to be completely invaluable for all your losers. Like, who's this loser that's throwing this idea out? But I guess I had a lot of early success. I had the dubs, if you will. And in that process, I think developed a sense of self that was way inflated. I made things about me, and that actually made me play smaller and smaller. It made me only as good as my atoms, my strength, my scope, and my sphere of influence, my brain. And in the bigger scheme of things, we're just tiny little creatures in this bigger planet, right? So like, why play small? The way to play big is to actually let it all go.
Interesting.
So I had to get to that place.
So a bit of that detachment, maybe.
Oh, detachment's such a good word. Yeah.
Okay. So tell me, I want to build into this point where you were okay accepting failures and starting to wear it as a badge. Talk to me.
Do you want to know where I was wearing it? Like,
please, yeah. I want one of those stickers like the police give out when you get the kids.
Yes.
We need failure.
Yeah,
We need failure badges.
I failed like I think it should be like military where there's actually stars and stripes and badges or like bars.
That's a
Probably
good idea.
For anybody who's serving, first of all, thank you for your service. And second of all, I just like stolen valor there. I don't even know.
We're just trying to relate here.
I'm trying hard. Am I trying too hard? Should I just let this go?
No, I think we're good. You can wear it as a badge.
Thank you.
You got it.
Just be present and alchemize that.
For sure.
Okay.
So
Good.
So tell me about your first project and where this sense of self kind of started entrepreneurially.
Gosh, the story that comes to my mind is when I was painting pipes as a summer job in the airport here in Billings. And computers were a new thing, but painting wasn't. So everybody understood the actual day job, but the day job for city workers also included lots of smoke breaks and long lunch breaks. And so the guys were sitting around smoking and I didn't smoke, and the guys were sitting around for an hour and a half and I was bored. And the manager of the airport's maintenance department had a little computer in the corner, and I started putting some things in there to keep track of the paper towels. I created a spreadsheet for them because everything was on paper, and that turned into an invitation to go up to the airport manager's office upstairs on the second floor, and that turned into an invitation to bid on building an accounts receivable and a property management system for them. So it was a completely accidental thing, born of a moment where I said, I don't smoke. I'm going to type this while these guys are sitting over there and doing whatever. I'm just going to go play. And that invitation really launched a whole pathway.
That's really interesting to me because one of my favorite ideas about the culture around smoking was that when smoke breaks became a thing, there was actually a lot of like upward movement inside of companies from people who did smoke, because during those smoke breaks, they were building relationships and they were like kind of earning brownie points with their uppers. So you got to reverse engineer that narrative a little bit.
It was, again, another failure.
Yeah, exactly. So what during that time, what was it about you that was willing to ask the questions of how can this be better? Like, why were you even thinking about, I should maybe put this in a computer in the first place?
Well, As I think back to it, I was simply curious. As I think back to it, kind of my own story, and I think many others that I speak with, as we are childlike, we're always asking questions of how does the world work? I think that's like, as a parent, when I first saw my kids growing up, like that's what we do. Like, what does this do? What does this do? What does this do? So we put together these objects. And I think in that moment, I mean, for goodness sake, I was 14 years old. Like, I just didn't know not to ask the question. It was that nobody had told me I shouldn't play. Nobody had said, I can't do this. So in that moment, I got lucky enough to have a success and never really built or had atrophy, if you will. I think that other thing that happens, like it didn't turn into a scar. It didn't get eroded. I didn't stop doing it. And that's, I think, what led me on that path. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you think that that moment, or maybe that project as a whole, created a positive feedback loop for your curiosity that you were able to continue with?
I never thought about it that way, but I think absolutely. Yeah. Positive feedback loop is exactly what happened, because as I had that success, that turned into, gosh, I got written up in Airport Manager magazine. Why? Because this little kid created this program. Well, then the Long Island, let's see if I can say it right, Long Island MacArthur Airport invited me to Ronkonkoma. And I flew out there and showed them the system. And they said, well, could you install it here? And so I remember installing that when I was 17 years old out there. And so that turned into confidence. And confidence is what I think drove and fueled so much of that. Confidence and curiosity.
Did that confidence come naturally? Or was there moments when you were a 17-year-old on a plane flying out to New York where you go, holy shit, is there any imposter syndrome here? Or are you just kind of in it?
No, because I wasn't hearing those voices that I couldn't. Nobody was telling me no. And my own brain wasn't saying that. There were already things that I was being told I couldn't do. Like, can we talk athletics for a second?
Please do.
You know how much I know about this subject.
You know as much about athletics as I do about pop culture.
That's entirely fair. But like, my story, part of it is, as a young kid, I had an older brother who was 7 years older, an older sister, 9 years older. So I was an oops baby. So let's start there. The accidental serendipitous child that all of a sudden is in this world. But my brother was a great athlete, a football player, and 7 years younger, I'm not going to be nearly as good as him. And so I remember in the backyard even tossing a ball and feeling really inferior. I don't know if he ever said anything to me directly. I don't want to say that or hang that on him, but I remember feeling like I was never going to be him. And so therefore I needed to find something else. And where I got affirmation was things like Mrs. Putnam in third grade, who had a computer that she would unload from her Saab 900 going into Boulder Elementary School and bring it in. And I could stay after school, and she would let me stay after school and play with this Apple II. And that encouragement created something very different for me. That's where I built that confidence in those areas. I didn't have any confidence athletically. I was always picked last.
That's interesting to me, that feeling that sense of inferiority combined with the confidence to go forward your own path is something that puts you in a spot being, 14, where you're still going like, yeah, I can do this. I'm just going to start making stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. My little brother is one of my favorite examples of that, where very similar story. He grew up in a family of mostly athletes. That was definitely a huge part of my story growing up. My dad was a football coach. I was one of his projects, and obviously maybe a bit more than that, but he never really caught on to sports. There was one time where we were taking him to basketball practice, and I was in the back seat, and my mom's asking him as he's complaining about going to practice. She's like, well, you can't just not go to practice and play the games. And he goes, well, I don't really like the games either. She's like, well, what the hell are we doing here? What do you like about doing this? He's like, well, I do like the snacks that the parents bring after the games.
The snacks. Juice box.
Yeah. So that was his very short ending to organized team sports.
Yeah.
But similarly, he struggled in school for quite a long time. Then he went to trade school, and my mom was like, we just get through this. Just pass it, show up to class. And she had this big incentive for him where Snap-on tools are like one of the biggest brands in blue collar, and like it's a really, some of the sets that they had are like $20,000 and are like the setup for somebody who's just starting. And they show up to orientation and they've got this whole setup and they've got a booth and all this stuff. And there's this really nice brand new tool set with a tool cart and everything. She was like, you get perfect attendance, I'll get you those tools.
Oh.
2 years later, he's got perfect attendance and almost a 4.0 after struggling his way through school forever. But he stayed true to himself the entire time.
So what's interesting to me is there was some sort of outside influence, right? Some force of energy. In this case, your mom creating that, but it also came from something inside. Do you think, Drew, about kind of external versus internal motivations and how that contributed to your story or his?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting about that is that one seems to be stronger than others almost always. Like that internal motivation, when we were talking about that voice earlier, where if his internal motivation is telling him, I'm a mechanic, I enjoy doing all of these things that are like with my hands, I'm not an academic, was probably also part of his story. The fact that that voice was louder than the external voice, that people were saying, oh, aren't you going to play sports? Your brother's a quarterback. Or, oh, aren't you going to come to this school because this and that? And he's like, no, I'm transferring to a school where nobody knows me. I'm going to go to trade school, which is very much against the conventional kind of junior high school narrative that your teachers are telling you. And so I think that's one of the reasons I'm the most proud of him, is I think that there's a pretty frequent battle between that inner voice and that external voice. And until you can find that puzzle piece where the world around you starts to support you, it gets really difficult. And so I think for him, it was walking into the doors of the trade school and he looked around he was like, oh, these are my people.
Yes.
And that's where the external voice finally started to give him the support that he needed to be like, everyone's like, dude, you're really good at this. This is awesome. Keep going. Your attendance is perfect. Your grades are great.
Right.
But up until then, I think that he fought those external voices the whole time.
You know, what's the unifying thing that I heard there is script. I'm just going to use that word.
Absolutely.
That's been my experience. The script that we tell ourselves is everything, because it's up here. It's up here. And it could be reinforced externally. It could be reinforced with an experience. It could be reinforced with a belief. But that script forms everything about where our energy goes. What we tell ourselves up here turns into what we do out here, and frankly, what ultimately gets created.
Do you believe that your personal script creates a sort of lens that you tend to see the world through?
I think it can. I would go so far as to say one of the things I've learned is how important it is to actually not have it turn into so much of a lens, but rather just this energy. In other words, feeling it and literally being in that moment as opposed to viewing it. And the reason I say that is I'm going to tell you about one of the voices in my head. I've given several of them names.
Okay.
So I've got Judge Judy, for those of you who know, right? So Judge Judy really can get activated quickly. She's a lens. She's a filter. And she looks at other people and says, you're stupid. Or she looks at other people and says, you don't get it. Or she looks at other people and said, you're not as good as me. Or she looks at other people and says, you have so much more than me. You're so much cooler. Right? Those kind of things. And Judge Judy gets so easily activated. But if I just say, thank you, Judge, I got this, I can let her do that.
Objection.
Yeah. Right? Right? There's a little bit of that going on. Like, she has a role. I want to honor her. I don't want to try to push her away, because I think that judgment is part of who we are as humans. But I also don't want to put her in control. And so the reason I don't like the idea of lens purely is because it implies that we actually aren't the camera person.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that a lot. So when you're 17, you're flying to New York.
Yeah.
You've had some successes, some early successes. What does that script start to build into for you at this time? What's going through your head as you're kind of finding this fit?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm telling myself is I can do anything. And that's a dangerous script, right?
Yeah.
But you start to believe it because, well, I might rephrase it as I can do anything that I want to do, which is a way to say, oh, okay, I'm not very athletic, so I'm just going to choose not to do those things. I could if I wanted to be a star football player, but it's just not what I want to do. It essentially creates a little bit of a feedback loop, which frankly creates noise, at least in my experience. And so
describe what you mean by noise.
Anything that gets in the way of truth. Truth is signal. So I have had to, and this took me 40 years to figure out. So I'm not saying at 17 I had this in my head, but I am aware of the fact that at 17 I started to believe more BS about myself than was even true. I actually went too far to the extreme, and that while it created a belief that led me to build a company and raise capital and have some early success, it also was the very thing I needed to shed to become the person that I was meant to be. And it took me up until really just a few years ago to kind of put all those pieces together and say, wait a minute, that was just a construct. That was just a filter on that camera in that moment. But really, I'm here for something so much bigger, and I'm just a steward of stuff. Yeah. It's not my stuff. I had to essentially dissolve my ego.
That's one of my favorite things, talking to creatives and business owners and people who have found some kind of passion that calls to them, and then they become a channel for that. One of the most common things that people like that say is that these ideas aren't mine.
Yes.
This creation isn't mine. It's something that I have made myself a channel to and that I respond to. And it's I think it's one of the ideas that's easy to cast off as a person's probably doing a lot of psychedelics and this and that.
Say, yeah.
But with that being said, I think that the first time that I heard that, I remember I was going through a little bit of like an information detox where I found myself constantly listening to podcasts. And if I wasn't listening to one of those, it was an audiobook. If it wasn't that, then I was scrolling on my phone, or I was in my business or in meetings. And I had, like you said, just noise always. And during that time that I first heard that, I remember I was going on walks for about an hour at a time with no noise, no headphones, which was foreign to me at the time. And I started to realize that I wasn't the one procuring these ideas, that I felt like I was a spectator that could see them come in, and I could choose which ones to grab onto, which ones I was going to respond to and take action on, but that it was my responsibility to take that thing which lives wherever it lives and bring it out into the real world.
Right.
So I'm curious, looking back, you had this idea to go from painting to this could probably live somewhere besides napkins. You have some success with it. How do you transition from, hey, I kind of like had this cool little thing where I helped some airports out, it gained a lot of traction. Now you've got this sense of, I don't know if I'd say a sense of identity, but the script around I can do anything I want to, and I've got this skill set. How do you transition? What's the next thing after you kind of see this early success?
Well, when you say transition, do you mean what was going on in my head, or do you mean what did I actually do? I think
a little bit of both. I think that those two things I would imagine they probably feed off of each other.
Yeah, there's a part of me that wishes I had a camera and a recording and all the pieces of what was really going on. Like, what was I thinking in this moment? And journals probably could be found somewhere with a few fragments related to this, like what was going on. And so I also want to just be aware of the fact that anything that I might be saying when I look back in time could just be an illusion. Like maybe it's really not what I was thinking, right? So
for sure,
I don't want to be too esoteric here, but as I look back and think about what I was most likely thinking about in that moment, it was, what do I love? It was, who can I serve? It was, where do my talents fit? I'll give you an example. What I loved in college more than anything else was a volunteer program that I got to be part of. What I loved was, in that moment, hanging out after school in a program with elementary kids and tutoring them. I love teaching.
Interesting.
I loved youth. And so I became not just an active volunteer, but I became an active volunteer coordinator. And out of that volunteer coordination, there were over 500 students in a volunteer program in my school of 1,700.
Mm-hmm.
We had a need to keep track of who all was interested in what. And so I started creating a little program for that.
Right.
And that turned into, I'm going to take a year off from college to actually create this program, to market this program, and to sell this to, it ended up being about 500 other college volunteer programs. But it didn't come from this place of, I'm going to solve this for the world. It came from a place of, I'm going to pursue something I love. And in that, I'm going to see an opportunity to apply the gifting that I have. And that's when it works.
Have you been in situations where you've tried, instead of following your heart and instead of doing the thing that you love, you try to just be like, gosh, what's the thing that's going to work?
Oh, for sure.
That's
what led to the failure.
Yeah, what's the difference?
Failure.
Yeah,
we're talking about big. Are we allowed to swear in this podcast?
Oh, yeah.
So I say big fucking failure?
You can. A
BFF.
BFF.
Yeah. Whoops. Okay, so do you want to hear about that failure or what led to that?
I want to hear, I do want to hear about it. First, I want to hear, talk to me about the difference that you feel when you're trying to, I describe it as trying to white knuckle your way into success, where you're grabbing onto something so tight and it's just like, if I squeeze hard enough, if I think hard enough, if I just like grind, that I'm going to come out on the other side with this success just because I worked hard or just because I thought hard. I think it's one of the worst places to operate from.
Yes.
And so that's kind of the black and white that lives for me between thinking with my brain and thinking with my heart when it comes to stuff like that. But I'm curious for you, what does that difference look like in phases where you followed your heart versus trying to think your way into success?
Can I answer first what it feels like?
Please do. Yeah.
So even watching your body language, Drew, as you were describing that, like you clenched a fist. Mm-hmm. I carry this physical tension, particularly in my neck or in my legs. I can actually feel myself tensing up. Like I had something happen before I walked in here with an engineering team for a company, and I was getting a little frustrated. I could feel my body moving to this place of must control. And I think that's a visceral biological response to trying to control. So what it feels like when I'm misaligned, what it feels like when I'm trying to push everything into it, what it feels like when I'm making the egoic false assumption that this is about me, is tense and heavy. And when I'm actually in the place of presence, when I'm actually pursuing purpose and fully aligned with that, it's light. It's a completely different posture.
Yeah.
It's open.
Yeah.
It's not this. It's, open, not closed. It's light. It's not heavy.
Okay. So when it comes time during those moments to make big decisions, to leave college for a year to go build something, how do those decisions and those big moments feel different when you're operating one out of alignment and the other side very much misaligned?
So in the moment of making the decision or after having made it?
In the moment of making the decision, because obviously deciding to leave school when you've got I would imagine a lot of feedback from your parents, your teachers, and there's a little bit of stress around, what do you mean you're leaving school for a year?
Yeah.
So what kind of feelings go into making a big decision when you're aligned like that?
This is fun to contemplate. Again, I wish I had that
a little journal
camera. Yeah. Like, what was this? Where's the AI tool that could capture these things in this moment today?
We need to wear GoPros 24/7 and be able to search for these.
Exactly. But, I guess I don't remember ever talking to anybody about the decision. So point number one is if I did, making sure that the sources of who I'm talking to are thinking about what's aligned for me as opposed to what's aligned for them. And I find that so many times the people that we may be seeking advice from are actually operating out of their own constructs. And like, oh, Drew, here's what you should do. But it's a way to vicariously go back and fix something that we would have done in that moment. It's actually our own story that's being transposed on somebody else. And it's actually not particularly helpful for other people. So I guess going back to that moment, I don't remember speaking with anybody else about that decision. So I didn't have that voice. I probably accidentally fell into a philosophy that I now carry today, which is be really careful with the voices that I'm seeking. To me, finding that truth is a question of clearing clutter. It's about actually quieting down. It's not data. And that's contrary. I would guess that I probably in my early 20s made a spreadsheet and listed pros and listed cons and created a ranking and said, in some sort of rational analysis, this is what's right. Mm-hmm. I would not even come close to that methodology today.
Interesting.
I just close my eyes and say, is this aligned or not?
Just feel into it.
Yeah.
Okay. So once you make that decision and you take that, I think it's a little weird to call that a gap year because it's not like it doesn't seem very gappy. But when you decide to do that, how does that start to play out for you?
So it was beautiful. I mean, I had an opportunity to, first of all, focus on one thing and only one thing. And so much of school is splitting your focus across subjects. And so that felt so awesome to have the energy into a thing. Second of all, I remember spending hours staying up sometimes all night, just coding what was in my brain or describing it and putting it out there. So it was this intensely creative period. I remember going to New York City for a conference. I remember going to Florida, and this was back in the day where to do a presentation in a room, you had to carry your own overhead projector.
Whoa.
And
are you flying with
attachment?
this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Holy
in the
cow.
overhead bin.
Whoa.
An overhead projector that I got that would fold up, and a black and white thing that you would set on top of the overhead projector that would attach as kind of like a monitor to your laptop. And then you could actually project in a room through that. Like this is what I was doing so that I could show people this product that we'd created. And this was in 92 or 93, something. Yeah, I think 1992.
Okay.
And I remember getting so much energy out of validation, out of telling story, out of essentially showing people a solution that I'd created to my own problem. Like, don't you manage volunteers too? Like, how do you know that they have the right programs? Do they know everything that they could do? Have they identified their skills and interests? And I was just so excited about it. So it was almost, and I'm sure it was endorphins, dopamine, all this good stuff.
Yeah.
But then I also remember there were moments of darkness with like, oh my gosh, I just shipped a new version of this software and forgot to comment out a particular line, so it didn't work for anybody. It was like a development flag or something.
And you can't make cloud edits in these days.
No, this was floppy disks.
Yeah.
We sent out, whatever it was, 60 copies of this, and the first person went on their computer and went to install it, and it didn't work. And I'm like, oops. And it also just left for the summer to go to Europe for a program. So I had to try to fix that from Cambridge in the UK. And it was a 2-week distraction. So there were failures that were associated with that, but it generally felt aligned. It just felt like it was what I was supposed to do.
Interesting. One of the things that is interesting to me is that I think I keep coming back to this like heart versus brain thing, where I think that the heart sets you on the feeling aligned. It's the late nights. They don't feel like such that white knuckle grind where you're just like, God, I don't want to be doing this. How do I do it? There's that excitement and that pull towards, I can't wait to get this project done. I can't wait to roll out this new code. I can't wait to do whatever. But there also has to be some sense of logical and rational thinking too, where it's like, I'm going to pick these trade shows because my audience is there, or it's going to be worth flying around the country to do these different things. I need to identify these different people to ship these to. So as you're kind of going through that, where you're building this company and you have to make some strategic moves, what allowed you to make some of the right moves during that time? How did you identify the right opportunities?
Well, I like the two dimensions that you plotted out, and I'm sure that there was the kind of analysis that you are suggesting that was both a rational one and a heartfelt one. I think for me, it was purely experimental. Like I just said, I wonder if. I didn't probably go through this very detailed, what are all the different shows? Because that's just not the way I'm wired. It's what's a show I can go to.
Back to that, back to the fact that voice of curiosity has not been stifled yet.
Yes, exactly.
It's still alive.
Yeah. And I think I didn't overanalyze. I think if I would have, I probably would have realized there's too much choice. And then I might have paused. I might have turned it into a trade-off. I might have missed. Really, it was the momentum that was created out of just forward energy that mattered. It wasn't choosing the right show. It was choosing a show and making it right. Wait, can I drop the mic?
Please do.
How do you drop
just
this?
Spike, just spike the whole mic arm.
That felt aligned. That's why I said like, oh, yeah, that's truth. Okay. I get goosebumps when things that I say or hear or feel are aligned. That's my body's literal way of saying, you got this. This is true. I just got goosebumps to that. So it's like, oh.
Yeah, we got it.
Okay. I don't know why they call them goosebumps. Does goose have bumps? Is there a podcast?
I think you'd have to pluck one to find out. And I'm not willing to do that.
Can we make this about goose plucking now for the next however long we get to talk?
Seems like a worthy rabbit hole.
A rabbit hole? Why are you changing critters on us
That's
now?
true.
Let's at least stay in the same farmyard.
We got to pick one. Do you think that following or at least noticing your body's signals has been something that you've always been attuned with, or did you notice at some point where it's like, oh, I'm noticing that I'm tense now?
Yeah, I think my body has been giving me signals all along. My ability to hear those has been significantly muted over time.
Interesting.
I got worse and worse at it. There's kind of an arc where in the beginning, I didn't even know what I was doing and was intuitively following what I think we were made to do, which is let's pursue this with curiosity. Let's just try this. That childlike wonder is what I was still doing in my 20s. Like, let's go to a conference and see. That sounds fun. And that created the rightness around that. But yeah, I think my body has taken a hit over time. By the time I was 30 years old, I was probably 25, 30 pounds heavier than I am now. And really bad health. In fact, I remember a triggering moment was going to get a life insurance policy because we were about to start a family, my wife and I. And the insurance agent essentially came back and said, okay, your test results are in. We're happy to give you this policy, but it's going to cost you twice as much. And it was in that moment that I realized that what that really meant was I was twice as likely to die or have some significant health event. I'm like, okay, statistically, there's a correlation here between my rate and what they're really trying to tell me.
Right.
And that was kind of an aha moment for me. And it caused me to start this whole different pathway of learning to cook. And that led me to 2 different food companies. And it actually led me for 10 years. I had a healthy foods company to kind of try to respond to the fact that I was making compromises. So there's an entire energy and pathway that was built out of my own body and my body responses. There's also a more recent event that I could share too that was,
I want to get into both. You said something before, though, that I want to touch on before we move on. And you were talking about being willing to be curious and just go.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have battled with in the past is analysis paralysis and wanting to have every option on the table that is lined out and feel like I know how every story is going to end if I take these different options. And it takes a long time of just sitting around doing nothing to get there.
Yeah.
And many times those pathways aren't as clear cut as I think that they might be. And so I'm curious for you, how does failure and willingness to fail play into that analysis paralysis in your experience?
Well, if you're willing to fail, you can release yourself of all of the pain. I'm going to describe it that way. All the weight might be another way to describe it that comes from analyzing. And there's so many assumptions that are baked into analyzing. The first is that you have full information. The second is that you can actually see the future. Well, both of those assumptions are just false. So stop it.
Yeah, right.
It's like that Bob Newhart episode, if anybody's ever seen this. Like, just stop it. Like, don't do it. And I know it sounds easy to say, and it's much harder to do in practice. But again, in my experience, the opportunities come from not analyzing, but rather sensing.
Mm.
There's truth. There's alignment. Is this aligned or is this misaligned? That's the only question. It's not, is this good? Is this hard? Is this expensive? Those things are irrelevant.
Mm.
It's not, is this one better than this one? That's a false construct. It's, is this what I'm going to do? Yes, then I'm going to make it great. Awesome. That's what I'm meant to do.
Yeah. I had a moment where Coley, your son, actually gave me that advice one time, as he said, instead of trying to make the right decision, make a decision and make it the right one. And he credited Theresa for that.
Awesome.
And it really sat with me because of that tendency that I have for that analysis paralysis. And I had another friend who was trying to make some big decisions, and I told him, I was like, dude, I just actually heard this really great piece of advice, and I gave it to him. He came back to me like 3 weeks later. He's like, dude, that advice that you gave me, like, I've been living my life by that. It's been so good. And I was like, well, I hate to break it to you, but I got that advice from a 19-year-old who got it from his mom. So I can't really take it. I can't really take credit for this one.
But isn't that the way the universe works?
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's what's so beautiful, is that here's this little atomic thought, this essence of truth, and it was shared, and in a moment it resonated, and then you shared, and in a moment that resonated. And there are so many times where I can point to what seems like completely random things, but really, I don't think they're random at all. I think it's just part of the design. I think it's part of why we're here. I think it's part of the purpose.
Absolutely. So before we move into the beef companies and that switch that you had where your health kind of led you down a different path, I want to close the chapter a little bit around that first venture with the tech company. What does it take, and where is your mind at where you get to an exit and you get to a point where it's like, this thing is coming to some sort of natural conclusion? What did that transition look like from like being totally in it? You're making this thing grow, you're doing trade shows, you're doing all of this stuff. How do we go from that point to an exit or kind of closing that chapter?
So an exit for that particular business?
For that particular business.
Well, in the case of the volunteer software, which we're talking about, or was the piece of the story I was sharing earlier, it was clear to me that that chapter was coming to an end, and I therefore needed to make some different choices. And that was partly out of my own passion shifting, and partly out of the fact that new opportunities were bubbling around. And so in my case, I had an opportunity to sell that business to another software company. It was a very modest sale, but it was at a perfect time because the internet was just starting to become a thing. This was distribution of software on 3.5-inch discs, which were a migration from 5 1/4. And this was like a big moment when we had software that was actually packaged up and shrink wrapped in my apartment.
Right.
And so the internet was just starting to be a thing. And I had started an ISP. I was making internet service available in my town. And I knew there was something else to this, and it was calling me. And so my energy was shifting over there, and the universe brought me something over here.
Interesting.
So again, it wasn't, I need to sell this. That comes from a different place. It's, this isn't sensing right. An opportunity came up to sell it, and that freed me to pursue something else.
That's a really interesting way to think about that. One of the things that, after knowing you for a handful of years, that I keep coming back to is your sense of pattern recognition. And one of the things that I've observed is your ability to, regardless of industry or who you're serving, to be able to recognize different patterns in different industries. And it's very interesting for me to hear that many of these decisions in your pathway have been heart-led and not sitting back and trying to like pinpoint things on a board and being like, I'm going to go do that because that seems like a big opportunity. So where does that pattern recognition that you have, does that come from more of like a heartfelt sense into what you're feeling into?
Yeah, I think that the skill, thank you for the compliments implied in that, the skill that I maybe have built over time to see certain things and organize that information applies to external and internal. So for me, it's been recognizing that there's market, customers, and opportunity out here, but there's also soul. And that's a third dimension that we haven't talked about between head and heart.
Yeah.
Soul, which is alignment with bigger purpose. I believe we've been created. And through that, I believe that we actually have an opportunity to live into an even bigger purpose, to connect and to love and to do amazing things in service for others. And so it's seeing that pattern exists in here, and then in this like whole here.
Interesting.
So I'm trying to apply that gifting in all three of those dimensions.
Got it. Okay. One of the things that I haven't experienced quite yet, that I have become extremely curious about in the last couple of weeks, is the identity transformation that might come from selling a company and starting to do a different thing. Being in business for the last 3.5 years, it would be hard to say that it hasn't become a part of me for my internal script to start to identify around, I am a business owner, which attaches to the business that I do or the podcast that I do. And I've grown very curious lately about when it comes time to sell a business that you have attached your name to, attached your face to, and really put a lot of energy behind. What does that look like when you go from selling this nonprofit software to exploring a new opportunity on the internet? How was that identity shift or that maybe mindset shift for you during that time?
Yeah, there certainly were positive things associated with that shift because, I was able to say I was a successful business guy who sold something. And so that energy that came from that script turned into more confidence to kind of play off some of the things we were talking about earlier. At the same time, because I had started that one from scratch and built it into something, I knew I could start something else from scratch and build it into something. So my identity shifted from entrepreneur to serial entrepreneur. Oh, I can do this again. And so I believed that about myself. And so I did that again. So I think, yeah, absolutely. The identity beliefs drive more progress in what we do and shape that. I would say today, I try not to have any attachment. Like the word that you were talking about there. Yeah, in my 20s, I was attaching my identity to, I am a business person. I am an entrepreneur. I'm a successful entrepreneur. Now I'm a serial entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. Today, I try to have no attachment. Like to me, that's what I figured out over time. Like, so I don't want anybody who may be listening to say, oh, look at all the good things that can come from identity, or at least believing something about ourselves. I actually think that more strength comes from releasing ourselves from all of those things.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really want to build into this story. And you mentioned it right at the beginning of getting super into yourself, into your ego, into this identity, and then kind of having this full circle shift where you've come to now. And from what I remember about your story, this next venture seems like it was kind of like the ultimate peak, or maybe the pinnacle of this self-identity of business owner, serial entrepreneur, all of these things. So walk me through a little bit of how this next internet company goes, and some of the things that you had attached to that as your like sense of self starts to, I don't know if inflate is the right word, but
for sure. Like a balloon. Like
yeah.
A little ASMR.
That's
a
perfect.
little too much.
It's perfect.
Okay. So, I can remember very distinctly reading a magazine, which I still subscribe to the print edition today of, Wired.
Okay.
And reading a story about an operating system now being available on a telephone handset, and that blowing my mind. Motorola had the StarTech flip phone, super high tech, really tiny, instead of the car luggage suitcases. Like this was transformational technology. And all of a sudden there was this convergence between telephone and computer. And those two came together, and my pattern recognizing brain said, wait a minute, this is actually going to be really big. And this was, 1998. Like, this was really early days. And there was this operating system that they were building called WAP, Wireless Application Protocol. And it was going to be available on a certain number of phones, and phones were going to start to standardize around this. And the idea is, my goodness, we could actually put software on a phone to run something other than just an address book or a message or a telephone call. And everything in my brain lit up around this. And so that moment on that plane, I remember being on this flight. I know where I was going in Wisconsin. I remember landing and like having sticky notes all over this thing. And I went back to this team that I was starting to build and said, okay, I know we're going in this one direction for internet services. And so I said, but I got this other idea. I think this is what we need to do. They're like, you're crazy. We've never done anything like this. I know, no. But that started that pathway.
Interesting. It's so, it isn't very impressive to me to be setting down a path already where you've got a team, you've got a mission, you've got all these things. And the willingness to say, I just recognized this thing that my entire self just lit up around. I've got this idea. I think that we should pursue this. And then take the thing that you're already doing and being like, all right, guys, we're going to think about this differently. What was it still? Does it still go back to that sense of curiosity and that sense of that voice that says, nah, maybe that's too big. No, maybe that's not the right thing. Maybe we should keep doing what we're doing right now. Does it go back to that sense where you're just willing to say, fuck it, we're not doing that. We're doing this new thing?
Well, I guess as I think back on that plane in that moment, I didn't look at it through the script of everything we've done to date is now a failure. I looked at it through the script of these are all building blocks that can now just be reassembled. That everything we did got us to this point. Not we were doing X and now we're going to do Y. It's I don't even know what we're doing. And it's just in the first part, we did a bunch of stuff. Some of it we'll be able to use and some of it we don't. But now we have this new thing. So I guess it gets back to the fact that because I hadn't maybe to my benefit, there's also a lot of downside to this we can explore too. But to my benefit in this moment for this part of the story was able to see possibility. But I didn't have attachment to it. I hadn't already said, oh, we're going to go do this and this is the plan. And, had the financial forecasts or investors who'd already committed to a particular plan. I had full freedom and flexibility. And most importantly, I had freedom and flexibility in my brain to say, this is a pathway. So it was, maybe the summary of all this is it was about orientation, not destination.
Got it. So we're headed in the right direction, but we're not attached to what the end destination is.
That's right. Because how do any of us know where we're really going?
True.
Let it go.
Yeah.
Can we sing that? Can we put a little soundtrack now too?
Well,
I have done karaoke of that song on
Frozen
more than one occasion.
Fair enough. I'm not much of a
I'll take
karaoke
at the
guy
end. You're not going to go there?
Maybe we'll play
at
it
the very
as
end.
The outro. Yeah. It'll be an Easter egg for all the people who listen to the end. Okay, so we get to that point, you land, and it sounds like it's all guns blazing. Walk me through the next couple of years and how this project kind of plays out.
Yeah, well, this is where I think the intersection of a couple of things happened. I had volunteered to help a friend of mine who was doing work with indigenous entrepreneurs, Native American, amazing young men and women who had not been given as many opportunities. And I was facilitating a workshop one day to help them think about business planning and help them think about being an entrepreneur. And I was a mentor to a couple of folks on the Zuni reservation. And sitting in this room, unbeknownst to me, was a guy named Ed. But I was facilitating this just as a pure volunteer thing. At the end of this meeting, this guy with pink socks and a cowboy hat, who hadn't said a word the entire time, and I had no idea who he was, came up to me, handed me his business card, and he said, "Have you ever thought about raising money?" And I said, "Well, that's interesting, because I was kind of working on something new, and I'll save you the details. I thought about selling the company to somebody else fairly recently to this particular event." He said, "Why don't you come out to New York and meet with me?" And a couple weeks later, he had bought the ticket. It was first class. I'm like, "Why are you spending the money for me to sit up front?" But I kind of like this.
Yeah.
I land, I meet with him and his advisor, and it was less than a month later, he wired me $600,000 for 15% of the company. And I still didn't even have a business plan really baked around this wireless thing. Didn't even know what I was doing. But Ed told me in the moment, he said, "I don't bet on companies or plans. I bet on people, and I like you." He had the money to write the check, and it was a frothy time in the internet. On the one hand, that was a very meaningful event in my journey. If that had not happened, Pathway would have been radically different, because here was now an outside person validating me in a bigger way and equipping me with more resources. At the same time, what it did was created a sense of expectation.
Yeah.
Now there's attachment. Now there's, oh my gosh, I got to do something with this money. And everything shifted. And many of those things were lovely and wonderful, and some of them weren't.
What did that shift look like?
Well, I think part of it was the mental, where I felt pressure. We felt like we had to not only find a plan, but make sure that we could get him 10 times his money back, or whatever the expectation was. So from a practical standpoint, what it meant is I went and felt like I had to spend it, first of all, because why have it just sitting in the bank? So I hired some more people. Not always the best use of funds.
Yeah.
Keep them available for when you're wanting to grow, not necessarily build. And the second thing is it created it started a fuse for the business, which was, oh, we need to go raise more money and more money and more money. So what happened is we had to spend time contemplating a product. We ended up architecting that. We ended up raising money for that. We ended up hiring more people for that. I spent the next year trying to find and doing over 100 presentations to bring in another bit of capital. We finally raised another $4 million, and it basically became a full-time fundraiser and wasn't even paying attention to building a team or building a product. So that's kind of the negative side to kind of what happened there. We built an interesting idea, but it created a lot of pressure around doing it quickly and doing it for a high return instead of doing it for what my soul's purpose was.
Is this one of the first times in your story that voice and that free curiosity starts to take a little bit of a beating or have a little bit of pressure on it?
Yeah, I think so. I remember a moment with starting on that venture capital path, and we by this point raised about $6 million and needed to raise some more money, and the investors that we'd brought in had basically said, okay, if you're going to raise more money, we're going to actually have to take all the people that first put in money, like your brother, the football playing brother, your dad, Ed, and we're actually going to essentially do what's called a pay to play. So we're going to require that they put in money at this valuation and a pro rata amount. So they're essentially going to put in double their money, or we're going to wipe out their stock. And I remember in that moment having to make a phone call to one of those investors. And along the way, I'd met the CFO of Walt Disney, Tom Staggs. And Tom had, on a brief call on the recommendation of a friend, given me $50,000. And I called up Tom and I said, I'm really sorry to have to be the one to deliver this news, but the existing investors have said, if you're going to raise more money, we'll give it to you, but there's this pay to play and we're going to have to reverse split. And I'm sorry about this. I have no choice. Those are the words I ended that sentence with, because this is emblazoned in my brain. You have no choice. And there's just this awkward silence on this call with Dom. And he says, you did have a choice. You could have said no. I just thought that was such a profound moment. Like, that was everything. That was truth. That resonated. I could have said no.
Yeah.
And I didn't. And what it did was solidify that I had actually gotten to the point where I had, not even with awareness, compromised my own integrity, my own values, what I cared about, and taking care of the same people that brought me and gave me energy to pursue these ideas. I was now selling those people out in pursuit of something else. And that like rocked me to my core.
Did it serve as a bit of a wake-up call that maybe you might have ventured away from the things that had brought you success that felt good to you and success professionally up to this point?
For sure. I was way out of alignment at that point. This was not even chiropractically adjustable. This was surgically like, yeah.
Interesting. What were some of the things on a personal level during this time where you've raised $6 million, you've, seen some success in venture capital, you've sold a company. Are you driving sports cars and living this like entrepreneur, look at me kind of thing? Like talk to me about some of that phase.
You want to hear about the Astoro Blue M3 Roadster?
I would love to.
I mean, for goodness sake, I bought a Cirrus airplane. I was enjoying sports cars. I was feeling like I was the shit, and getting further and further away from who I really was. And I knew something wasn't right, but there was something intoxicating about it. There was something that was validating, and it was almost this like egoic monster was just wanting to be fed. It's like, oh, I know this isn't right. And I still remember the BMW salesperson because I already had one BMW in the driveway, but I needed an X5, and it was the first year they'd come out with one. And, this was like, whatever the year was, 20 some years ago, still a $60,000 vehicle. And I applied for credit and got denied. I'm like, what? Don't they know I'm worth millions of dollars on paper? Like, who do they think they are? And I got angry, and I'm like calling the sales guy, and I'm like, you don't realize who you're talking to. I'm like, I remember hanging up being like, who the hell do I think I am?
Yeah.
And I ended up they found somebody else who was willing to underwrite the risk for an extra $200 a month in interest payments or whatever, right? 18% or something on a vehicle and a $1,200 payment that I shouldn't have been making. But I didn't like who I'd become. My wife sure didn't either.
Does some of those things, whether it's the car, the house, the clothes, any of the stuff that comes with the material success during those times, does any of that stuff also create a bit of that pressure and a bit of that, maybe like a golden prison a little bit, where you continue to have to feed that beast? Yeah,
for sure. I think it largely because of, again, I'm going to go back to the scripts that we tell ourselves. Like, it became my identity. I am a BMW driver. Like, that was who I was. So therefore, to drive that old Honda Prelude, like, who does that? Or my first car in college, when I had that volunteer software, was my grandparents' 1979 Chrysler New Yorker.
Hey.
A big boat, and it was flippin' awesome.
I have a 1982 New Yorker right now.
Yes, that's great cars.
They are great.
So, like, I could just, like so much fun to drive. But, like, my identity turned into all this false crap. And it was just more and more layers. And so, it not only had to be fed, but it almost had to continue to be covered up. Like, it was an internal thing and an external thing, more and more layers of crap, which made it harder and harder to see who I really was, because who I was underneath all of that was really nothing. And I wasn't comfortable with that anymore.
Yeah.
What I missed was the opportunity that had I seen that earlier, that's everything. To actually say we're nothing is the most profound place we can get to.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like you, during this phase or around this time, you go to get life insurance.
Yeah.
And you have a bit of a come to Jesus moment.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Jesus.
Thank you, Jesus. What shifted during that time? And you alluded to it a little bit already, but what kind of changes did you start to make during that shift?
Well, the first was cooking. And again, I can picture seeing on our television a show from a guy named Alton Brown called Good Eats. And here's this guy, the very first episode I see, he's going through an old junkyard. He finds a school locker and he turns it into a smoker. And all of a sudden, he's got this amazing meal on the table. And cooking became interesting. Cooking became scientific. Cooking became entrepreneurial. And we had a baby at home. We weren't able to eat out as much. And I saw that as an opportunity to learn and to do something else. So it ignited a passion in this same exact moment that all this other stuff was going on. But I also can take you to a passion for eating, which was when I was eating out on business trips, was causing me to gain more and more weight.
Right.
So much so that at the steakhouse in downtown Minneapolis called Manny's, a week before Christmas, I go out to dinner with a key investor and a member of our board of directors, and we have our salad presented, and we just ordered our steaks, and he says, "Hey, Keith, I've got some news for you." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, the board and I met, and we've decided that we're going to terminate your employment." I was the founder of the company. I'd raised all this money. I was literally about to feast on probably a 20-ounce steak of some sort as an unhealthy dude. And in that moment, a week before Christmas, with a 2-year-old at home, lost my job.
In
my
a company that
identity,
you built.
And everything. Yep. The start of phase 2. Yeah.
Wow. I'd imagine that the appetite for said steak that showed up probably wasn't super present after that.
Yeah, I went to the bathroom as soon as he delivered that news. I was in tears. I was crying in there. Probably had a Motorola StarTech. Remember, I didn't call anybody, didn't call my wife. Had to try to go back to that dinner table. At that point, steak was now there. And sit there and try to have a conversation with a guy. I'm like, this is not the best place to even do this.
For sure. Yeah. How about in the parking lot after, dude? Goodness.
Just a really humiliating would be the best way to describe it now thing. Because he had basically said, "You're not good enough. We don't want you. But now please continue to enjoy the rest of this meal on us because it's the last thing you're ever going to get."
Wow.
So
that's crazy.
Yeah.
So do you think that moment needed to happen?
Oh, for sure. Best thing that ever happened to me. I mean, the way I like to think about this, Kintsugi. Do you know Kintsugi?
Yes, it's one of my favorites. Please describe it.
Can I describe it?
Yes, please do.
Like this art in, is it specifically Japan?
Yeah.
Okay. So, when beautiful porcelain vessels have been crafted and break, instead of saying, "Look at these broken pieces now, let's just discard," or "Let's create something else," they say, "Let's actually reassemble and make it more beautiful. Let's take these broken pieces and fill it with gold." And that was my shattering moment. I was in multiple pieces. My ego was completely blown up. My company, my entire social structure was gone. Where I drove to work, a source of income. I remember going through a Byerly's in Minneapolis at 10:30 in the morning, and this was before people would work from home. And I looked around and said, "I'm an unemployed guy. I don't even know what that means and what that looks like." Like everything was completely shaken. And so those pieces out there on that table, while it took me a while to put them back together, were needing to be shattered so that something more beautiful could be created from that gold.
That's such an incredible way of looking at it. I think that it's also a retrospective way of looking at things that maybe is really hard to get to in the moment, where when you have that ego death, that shattering, that letdown, that really humiliating moment,
for sure.
I think that it's really hard to see while all those pieces are laid on the floor that this is your Kintsugi moment, where you get to start making this a beautiful piece of work. You get to start making this failure, making this challenge something that becomes a beautiful part of the story.
You know, one of the questions that I know I was asking myself, because it took me another decade to realize, again, incorrect script, wrong belief. The question that I was asking myself was why? It's so easy to go to why. Why did I get fired? Why did they need to hire somebody else? Why? What did I do wrong? Like, why is the wrong question? Just the opportunity we have is to ask, what now? What now? Okay, this created entirely new room for something else. What now? And when we ask what now, we open ourselves up to a world of possibility, free of judgment. Judy can still be there, but she doesn't need to be part of that conversation. Judy, get out of the way. What is this creating for me in this moment?
How did you start to pick up the broken pieces that were maybe your identity, your sense of self, your professional life?
Yeah.
How did you start to pick those up and start to weave that gold in between it and start to build that vessel again?
Well, it certainly wasn't easy, and I don't want to suggest that I had the presence of mind to do all of this particularly well. But I can tell you that there were practical things that had to be done that also led to spiritual things that I was able to do. So from a practical standpoint, one of the things I needed to do was sell the airplane. I don't have the money. I don't even have income. For goodness sake, I didn't even have the cash to buy the plane. It was being financed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sold the plane to a guy in Monterey who said, would you please deliver it? And I said, sure. And it just so happened that I didn't want to fly all the way from Minneapolis to Monterey in one day. I said, hey, I want to split that up. Oh, maybe this would be an opportunity to go back to Montana and see my friend Jael, who had a ranch in Red Lodge. And so I plotted a trip. I landed in Red Lodge. I spent a couple of days on her ranch, clearing my head, moving hay, feeding horses, and just conversing with a dear friend. And flew out the next day to Monterey, delivered the plane. Still remember the very last flight I took with that airplane. Sunset over the water. You got to picture the beach. And probably flying much lower. This is off the record. FAA is not listening to this, right? Like 10 feet above the water. Like
Right.
It was, there weren't anybody around. There was no boats. It was just me and this airplane, and it was goodbye. And I remember also crying in that moment, saying this phase of my life is done. And flying for me had also been just a source of great passion. I felt like I was meant to do it. It was part of my soul. And I had to just let that go. And I landed the plane back, and the next day, gave the guy a couple of flights and took off and flew commercially home, knowing it would be forever, probably, that I would ever get back in my own plane. And in that moment, it just was so clear that this is where I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to be doing. And I wasn't supposed to have this anymore. This is this peace that came over me. That particular meeting with Jael, what I left out in that story is the night before I left, went out for a beer at a restaurant called Bridge Creek. And that beer was with a guy who owned a beef company, who'd started a beef company. And we started a conversation that once I got back from delivering that plane after that sunset flight, we had another phone call, and that turned into a whole different pathway.
The serendipity of that, where you decide, I'm not going to fly straight to Monterey. I'm going to stop in Red Lodge. I'm going to decompress a bit.
Yeah.
I think some of the things, again, looking back on it, where the headspace that you're in of, I just got a chance to talk to a dear friend for a while. I just got to reconnect with horses and working with my hands and doing all these things. And then the headspace that you're in for that conversation with that gentleman was probably dramatically impacted by the things that you chose to do while you were with jail. And also coming back from letting go of this part of your identity, letting go of this part of really maybe like a token or a symbol of success that you had, and coming back, it sounds like you were operating from a place of humility and maybe like centeredness, where you had gotten a chance to kind of come back into, okay, I've stripped away all of these things. Now I'm get to be me, and there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
What did you start to do with that opportunity?
I want to go back to something you said. I've never before recognized the pattern in the word humility and humiliation.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
look at the root of that. But
humiliation can really bring you down to the floor for humility.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure they're connected etymologically, but so my brain just kind of got hung on that when you said that, because it took me that humiliation, which had the value attachment. I'm sure that's kind of part of the meaning of that word, right? Like, it's how I'm feeling about this to create essentially that leftover post-alchemization element of humility. Like, that's what came from that.
Yeah.
And that was something I was able to bring into this moment. I remember very distinctly sitting down with Derek, and I was not trying to tell him how to build his business. I was not trying to tell him anything about what to do. For goodness sake, I just been fired from the one that I started.
Right.
I just remember empathizing with him and what he was going through. I just remember building relationship with him and trying to understand his story and his passion, what had led him to that place.
You're back into curiosity.
Yeah. And that fueled that everything else that followed. So
that's got to be such a cool place to operate from. I can't imagine what it's like doing that when you've got a wife and a kid and you've got people counting on you all of a sudden.
Well, I think the good and the bad is that my wife and I are wonderfully compatible and wildly different. She does think about all those things, and I do not. My brain doesn't even go there.
Sounds like a great team.
And thank goodness we have each other, because I need somebody to say, wait a minute, the babies need to be fed.
Yeah.
She needs somebody to say, it's going to be okay. We've got this, and God's got this. So
what is it like having a support system in a team like that when you go through one of these humiliation phases that brings you to that humility?
It's rich, it's beautiful, it's amazing to have support. It also is clarifying. I remember going, I had to clear all my stuff out from the office that I had built. Things like my Bang & Olufsen stereo. I'm like, do I take this? Do I leave this? Is this company property? Is this my property? And I remember, I went up before most people were there, 6 a.m. or something like this, because it was humiliating to be there. And a guy named Chris walked into my office and said, you know what, Keith, this company needs a new CEO like I need a second asshole. And there's just something about that in that moment, that phrase. He has no memory of even saying this to me. And I will never forget those words. Because what he was basically saying is, this isn't rational. Something else is going on.
Mm.
And I'm here with you. And we can't take this too seriously. All through one phrase in a moment. And it became clear he was a dear friend. He's somebody I'm still incredibly connected. He became a board member of one of my businesses. He's now the president of an amazing $100 million company in Minneapolis. I adore this guy. He's a mentor to me, and he was on my team in that moment. It's beautiful to see what happened in there. never would have predicted it. But what I mean by clarifying is he showed up, but other people that I thought I was close to didn't want to have anything to do with me because they were worried about their own jobs.
Mm.
They didn't want to have a conversation with me because the board said, don't talk to him. So they prioritized protection over integrity as well. And I don't fault them for that. Probably would have done the same.
I think that comes from a very scarcity or survival mindset, maybe where, I think that's a lot of times what allows people or maybe forces people to stay in a job for a long time that's misaligned, or to stay in a company for a long time that's misaligned, is at the end of the day, it's that survival and maybe that lack of trust of that intuition and that heart-led sense where it's like, no, I do like this person. I am in this person's corner. I support them. We've been through a lot together.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I also have to feed my kids. I also have to keep this roof over my head. And I think that in a lot of ways that is a noble thing, but it can also be very limiting and become evil in different ways.
I guess the thing I feel compelled to offer right now is the light I want to shine is not on the 50 other people who never even talked to me from the time I got fired, but rather Chris, who in that moment was a human and a friend.
Yeah.
And the reason I want to shine that light is because of the impact it made on me and my path. It was a simple message. It was a 1-minute message. And it made all the difference in the world. Yeah. And we have these moments when we intersect with people where our stories collide. And I remember listening to a story of an artist, a professional cartoonist, and he was describing going into a classroom. And he was in there teaching how to draw, some scene, and going around to the kids' desks afterwards. And he spoke just a couple of words to somebody there. And he said, "That's really good." That person was actually the one that ended up telling the story on this podcast. It was in that moment, 3 words by a professional cartoonist that changed. This person also became a professional cartoonist.
Wow.
Because in that moment, 3 words, how many seconds does it take?
2, 3. Yeah.
2-3 seconds. That's it. Trajectory, skip, boom. Like this energy, this intersection, the beauty that came from that. And I think we miss the fact that it's not just our own journeys. And I'm trying to kind of make this, it's not really about my story. It's about all the people that have come around me in my story. My story is the sum of all these points of intersection of all these other people who also had the presence of mind, who also were willing to pour into me or who believed in me. Those are the people that made this story what it is. It's not me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that idea of standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yes.
And giants can come in so many different shapes, sizes, situations.
They could be 19-year-olds offering advice from their mom.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in my case, for sure. Yeah, that's, I think that is it's a very liberating idea to think that any moment that we decide to be present for and to open our hearts to somebody could have that level of impact on their lives. I think that it's also a great reminder that really is what it's about. It's not about the X's and O's or the P&Ls and all of that stuff. It's about the human aspects, the human condition, which, much like you were describing, can get very easy to lose when you really lean into the pressure of building something and the grind and all of the things that surround that.
Why are we building it anyway? It's not our stuff.
What are we grinding for?
What are we grinding? It's not our stuff.
Yeah.
Like it is. And I love that word liberating. It's light. It's free. Like if we just say today, our opportunity is to be.
Yeah.
Can I tell you one more story?
Please do.
So, I had the opportunity this spring to teach at Rocky 1 day a week in a class on sales and marketing. And I was the AI guy. And I remember intentionally kind of processing with my own AI tool that I'd built called Flow to help me stay in flow, kind of this alter ego tool that I use. Like, who do I want to be when I show up there? I remember saying, like, my entire purpose for saying yes to this was not because I wanted to feel good about the fact that I'm teaching or feel smart because I'm in front of students, or it was none of that. It was, if I have an opportunity to encourage somebody else in this to pursue their gifts or to discover something about themselves, that is a huge win. And that is my only purpose here. And, first day, kids are like, who's this guy? He's a little bit weird. He's making us talk to each other, and a little bit awkward. Second day, they're starting to warm up a little bit. By the third week, some of the kids are hanging around afterwards and asking me some questions. By the fourth week, there's like 5 kids that are hanging out afterwards and feet up on the back. And, those football types are rocky, right? Like, and this one guy says, hey. I said, yeah. He said, I hear you're not getting paid for this. I said, no. He said, why are you doing it? I said, because it's aligned. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I believe I was created by God for a purpose. And in this moment, I have an opportunity to share my gift and my story with others. He said, but you're not getting paid. And I said, I know. He said, then why are you doing this? And I said, maybe it was just so that I could have this conversation with you in this moment. And he just looked at me. He's like,
Wow.
Turns out this guy's name means messenger of God. I was like, okay, thank you. Nice validation. Nice alignment.
Yeah.
So,
holy cow. Those moments are so crazy.
I jumped from back there to
no, it's all good. So it sounds like there's a lot of shifts that came from that moment of humility, that reset, and some of the serendipity that happened during that time. Without necessarily having to stop at every point during the story, what are some of the big moments where you started to really shift into operating from this sense of alignment, from operating from this sense of maybe this new sense of self that is more true to who you are instead of the profession that you do or the businesses that you build?
Mm-hmm. Well, a piece to the story that I will also share is with the food company that I was building that essentially grew out of the beef company that I came to Montana to run. Ended up moving on from that and starting this healthy foods company. It was also turning into a bit of a grind. It was hard to do what it was that I was doing. It was taking a lot of cash, and I didn't want to raise capital again from the outside because I felt very strongly that that hadn't worked out well in the past, and I wanted to be very careful. I ended up taking a little bit of money, and things are okay with the story, but at some point, that ego also crept back in. And so I want to acknowledge that to say this has not been this linear process of learn and then apply and move forward. Mm-hmm. I'm not that bright. It's taken me a couple of times. I think God has a way of kind of orchestrating things. So it's like, did you get that? Nope, you don't really got that lesson. We're going to try this. We're going to try this again. So I've had lots of opportunities to learn and relearn. And in this particular case, decided to build a beautiful home in Red Lodge that it was a little bit risky to try to build. Didn't have a source of income. Starting a new company. Didn't want to raise capital. Thought I could get through this construction loan and convert it to a mortgage. Couldn't. All of a sudden, I have a very expensive home and no ability to even have a mortgage, and ended up having to give up that home. Not only that, but in trying to service and make payments to try to even make that happen, found myself putting everything on credit card and going way into debt. I had over $300,000 in debt, just personal unsecured debt. Had no choice but to, Tom might have said it differently, but to essentially say, I gotta declare bankruptcy. And that was also another one of those moments.
Right.
Because my identity had been provider. My identity had been, oh my gosh, I came back again. I built another company. We had some success. I built another company. I had some success. And yet God's like, yeah, you still think it's about you. You or you still think that this is something that you can construct and that you are responsible for? Let me just remind you, you're a steward. It's not your stuff. And so I had everything essentially stripped away from me. But before I decided what to do, I remember Theresa, my dear wife, had the presence of mind to suggest that I spend some time again in retreat. So I went into the mountains. I went off to the East Rosebud area and took a hike one day. I fasted for a couple of days and went up on Phantom Creek Trailhead. And I remember really clearly, for me, I'm going to tell this through my own faith perspective, but hearing from God. And I heard so clearly at this lake at the top, this word compass. And we hadn't talked about that tech company I had was essentially in the business of GPS on software. It was trying to get the Roto-Rooter plumber to their job on time. It was all about direction. It was about turn by turn planning it all out, which is ironic given the fact that what I really needed to learn here in this story was that's actually not the right way to be. The right way to be, when I heard that word compass, it was so clear to me was, again, about orientation, not destination. I feel like God planted that word in my heart that day. And I remember coming back, walking down, saying, I don't have to solve it. I don't know how I'm going to get out from this debt. I don't know how I'm going to get out from this mortgage payment. I don't know how I'm going to take care of my kids. I don't know how I'm even going to pay bills. And I don't have to. All I have to do is the right thing today.
Wow.
And I remember there was a pair of sunglasses I had seen on the path on the way up. And I had this dialogue. This sounds really strange, but I was in my own head saying, I should keep these. These are really nice. Thank you, God, for this gift. I'm broke. These sunglasses are like $200 and they're Oaks and they're like, these are going to be awesome. And I remember getting back 4 hours later in the parking lot at Phantom Creek Trailhead, and somebody's sleeping in their car with their windows down. I'm getting in my truck. I shut the door. Said, I gotta go see if these are this guy's sunglasses. So I wake this guy up and I said, I'm sorry to bother you here, but are these yours? He said, oh my gosh, I thought I'd never see those again. And it was just this moment of like symbolizing the fact that God in this moment also was testing me again.
Yeah.
It's not my stuff. These are not my sunglasses. Stop trying to keep them. Stop trying to think this.
Yeah.
We just talked about this at the top with the word compass. You're now at the bottom. Here's test number 1.
Right.
10 minutes after we just studied the material. You got this, Keith? It's not yours. And it was such a beautiful opportunity to reinforce the fact that, yeah, these aren't mine. And it was exactly what I needed to do in that moment was to give those back to that guy. Because who knows what his side of that story is? Who knows if he even remembers this story?
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
In that moment, that's what I was supposed to do.
It seems like it was a symbolic commitment to this new lesson that you had learned.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
What did the larger commitment to that lesson look like as you are facing that kind of debt?
Yeah.
A family, like you've got so much that's stacked. Again, I don't know if I'd say for you or against you, but you've got a big mountain to climb.
Yeah.
And you've got this new lesson and this new compass. So how do you start to lean into that with this challenge ahead of you?
Well, what became clear to me then and has thankfully been ever since, this lesson I now hold really closely, which is I am not on this journey alone. And for so many entrepreneurs, I think we struggle with this idea that it's on us. We carry this loneliness. We carry this burden. We shoulder the weight. That's the wrong way to look at it. It's not on us. First of all, we're stewards of stuff. We're stewards of relationships. We're stewards of clients. We're stewards of people. We also have this opportunity to evolve ourselves through that stewardship and just see what is it that we're made to do in this moment. So what it looked like for me from that point forward was being more closely connected with Theresa and with friends that could support me through this, and B, having a much more intimate and personal relationship with God, where I was able to spend that time really listening to and seeking advice from my Creator.
That's so incredible. It's inspiring to hear that for me, because being in different positions where it feels like, what's on the other side of this? Can I, have I, that sunk cost fallacy of, have I put too much into this to turn around now, to shift now? Are these skill sets that I built something that can get me through whatever this next challenge is? Or is it time to get a job? Is it time to throw in the towel? Is it time? Like, there's so many of these different pathways where it's like, I do think that just like the sunglasses could be a test of a positive lesson that you just learned, I think that there are also a ton of lessons where it doesn't feel as good as it feels to give somebody sunglasses.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like getting fired while you're about to eat a great steak at one of your favorite restaurants.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that really is inspiring for me to hear that, even in some of those moments where it's like my identity is around parts of, I don't quit.
Yeah.
I keep going. I keep doing these things, but there's this challenge ahead of me that is questioning, is that really who you are?
Yep.
Are you really not going to quit?
Right.
In the face of $300,000 of debt? You sure you got this?
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what are some of the things that you started to do as you've got this personal sense of, I've got my wife, I've got my friends, I've got the right people on my bus.
Yeah.
We have to go somewhere that gets over this mountain. What do you do?
I love the question, and I'm also going to challenge the assumption.
Please do.
From that point on, what I've tried to do is make it less about doing and more about being. So while there were activities, and your question's entirely valid, yes, there were things I did, the biggest shift was the script-based mindset one, which is, how do I need to be? And that was the unlock. And it's deceptively simple. And so what I did was nothing the way anybody else might think about it. What I did was everything in terms of what it did for me, which was reframe and realize I needed to release. Say, this is not this is an opportunity. And so what do I do in this moment? And it sounds really hyper focused, maybe a little foreign to people, but like, it was literally like, in the next hour, what can I do? In the next minute, what can I do? So what I do came out of where I need to be, and where I need to be is in this moment. So I'll give you maybe this very abstract, a specific example. We still were living in this house that we couldn't afford. We were driving our kids. I still remember the Jeep, because we hadn't gone through essentially the liquidation process post-bankruptcy. So I still had a Jeep and was driving the kids to school. And I remember singing silly songs. I remember having this like joy that came from the fact that, I was with giggly, bubbly, energetic, probably 8, 6, and 3-year-olds, like beautiful age, and saying, I don't know that life can get any better than this.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if we're going to be living in a tent. I don't know where we're going to get groceries from. But what's cooler than Eli and Cully back there laughing? Like, it just brought everything in perspective when I let everything else go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really hard to have gratitude and fear live in the same place.
Yeah, that's such a good instinct. Yeah, so what I did, I guess maybe putting it a different way, what I had to do was dissolve that fear and say, there's nothing that can happen that's the good thing about hitting bottom that's any worse than this. Like, what? I've already lost my house. I've lost a job. I've got no income. whatsoever, I'm not even going to have a vehicle to drive. Okay, well, what's left? I guess I just get to be.
Yeah.
So the nice thing about having everything stripped away is I had nothing to worry about.
Rock bottom is a very firm place to stand on.
It is. And I think it would have been easy for me to turn to drugs, alcohol, depression.
Yeah.
Those are very logical. I have so much empathy for people who've been through this and have had to go through that. I look at social support programs radically differently, having needed one.
Mm-hmm.
When I had to go into the Office of Public Assistance and say, I don't know how to pay for groceries. What do I do? And I still remember the face on this woman just being joy-filled, super kind, walked me through it, gave me a hug, and said, here's what you do. Like, I'm getting teary right now. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think being in one of those moments and being able to relay that to people, it's easy at the beginning of a conversation to laugh about failure and about the stripes that you get on your jacket and stuff
boom,
like
boom,
that. That's a really big, important stripe, being able to have that level of failure and then find a way to alchemize it, find a way to go back to that Kintsugi.
Yep.
You've had some beautiful vases that have been spiked onto the floor, and you've found ways to keep coming back and, build a beautiful family, build beautiful businesses, connect with people and really have a lot of impact through the ways you choose to serve. And I think it's very inspiring. I'm curious, after going through that I don't know if I'd say last humiliation, but going through that one where you've already got a better sense of self, where it's like, I've been through this before. I've been fired from a company. I've been in financial struggle. I've been through all of these things. It seems like at this point you would probably have lots of the tools that you need to be like, okay, I'm just going to be now.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the person that can do this. I'm going to be the person that follows my heart, that does all of these things.
Yeah.
I'm curious, from that moment to now, what has being looked like for you? And what are the things that are key pillars for that in your life?
Well, I had a flashback to a magazine cover. I think it was probably Time magazine back at the days where I used to subscribe to that one too.
These magazines have been a very good investment for you so far.
and the cover of this was an Olympic athlete in the Winter Games named, I think it's Sasha Cohen. I want to say like Sasha Cohen, but that's the comedian dude, right?
Again,
anyway,
pop culture, you got me here.
Okay. So I apologize to this amazing woman athlete, skater, who I'm probably not going to get her name quite right, but generally directionally starts with an S and a C for first name and last name. And she had been in the Olympics in figure skating, and she was eighth or ninth going into essentially the last night skate. And she skates flawlessly. The most beautiful performance that most of us had ever seen. Olympic judges gave her tremendously high scores. And serendipitously, providentially, statistically, everything worked out that here was this woman in ninth who had no chance of even being a medalist, ended up winning the gold in that event. And the interview that they had with her, I don't remember anything else about this story except the punchline. It just stuck with me forever. I said, what was going through your mind? And she said, I skated as if I had nothing to lose. And I think that is such a profound way to be. I skated as if I had nothing to lose. So the last 10 plus years since this bankruptcy have been skating as if I have nothing to lose. Awesome. Cool. Let's see what happens with this. Let's see what happens with this. Let's see what happens with this. Because I've been to the bottom and I know what that's like. And I got groceries today.
Yeah. One of my favorite ideas, and I think it is has a lot of parallels with your story, is actually from Picasso. And Picasso was an exceptional painter that could achieve a lot of very high level concepts and techniques and things very early. And have you visited the Picasso Museum in Barcelona?
No.
Okay, so it's an incredible, and the way that they lay it out, what we know to be Picasso paintings are very abstract. They're very, like the ones that we know of don't look like you're trying to paint in realism. It doesn't look like something that's very conventional. But as you're walking through this museum, you almost forget that you're in a Picasso museum because nothing looks like that for a while. It's all realism. He goes through this big black and white phase. He's like following these techniques that are very common in his era. And what's very interesting is as you come to the end of the museum, you see what you know as Picasso today. And it looks like, God, a kid could have done this.
Yeah.
You know, like how did he go from all of this super technical, very important, like very, you know, these massive works back to this? And Picasso describes it when somebody says, a kid could have done this. He says, we begin our lives with this creativity and this curiosity. And at some point you forget it. And I spent my whole life learning how to paint like I was a kid again.
Yes.
And I think that the parallel in your story is it sounds like you've gone through these early successes where you're painting like a kid. You're creating stuff because it's like, why the fuck would we write this on napkins? Let's do it this way. And then we're going to be creative. We're just going to follow this. And then after these big life moments where you just get like spiked on the floor and you've got all your pieces of your vase, it seems like in the last 10 years, like you're describing, you've gotten back to that curiosity and that painting like a child, that skating like you have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I'm very curious. How does that feel now?
Light, joy, aligned, awesome. Like I love hearing that story of Picasso. Now I need to go to this museum. I have this opportunity to go. And if anybody on this podcast listening audience wants to join me, let's go.
Let's do a group trip.
Go a group trip. Maybe if I could tie it together. In my 20s, I was really focused on and attached to what I was doing. My identity came from what I was doing. In my 30s, because I had been fired at age 30-ish, 30, 31, I decided to not be fully committed to things because I was very worried that I would turn into that again. And so if there are two variables here at play, one of them is our commitment and the other is our attachment. In my 20s, I was fully committed and fully attached. And those were just like in conflict. And that was I gotta do this.
Yeah.
And that clearly didn't work out. And in my 30s and early 40s, I switched to, let me be half committed and half attached. And that's a really lousy place to be too.
Yeah.
Because you're not aligned. You're not really in it. And it didn't have balance. And what I figured out about really 5 years ago, this solidified for me. The place to live in freedom and joy is being 100% committed and 0% attached. And that equation is everything. So
it's a beautiful place to be. For people who are inspired by that story, who connect to that idea, what are some of the things, what are some of those starting blocks or some of the things that they could notice to try to get to that point where they can be 100% committed and 0% attached?
I don't want to suggest that anybody else's pathway has even parallels to mine or the things that worked for me will work for them.
Right.
So we're all on our own journey. And yet, for me, what worked, if it's helpful for somebody else, is to realize that it's a decision, that it's a choice, that it's binary. I'm either going to be present, I'm either going to be committed and unattached, or I'm going to let all this other noisy stuff get in the way. I'm going to pursue what I think is right. I'm going to hold things tightly. I'm going to, it's a choice. And it's actually not just a choice we make at a big level, big capital CHOICHE. Oh my gosh, where's right click? I wanted to right click. Like, where's Grammarly right now? Like, brain, you can still work. I know you can. But what happens for most of us here is like the choice that we have is if we're tuned in, like right now, it's just right here. Like, am I going to have this water or not? Like, can I be present? So the punchline, I've set alarms on my watch. I've set things on my calendar. I have a protocol I go through in the morning so that I am as present as possible throughout the day in every moment I possibly can be. I'm not perfect at that. I will skip those things if I don't feel like it, or if I'm feeling grumpy, or if I want my Judge Judy to hang out. Sometimes it's fun to hang with her and have a beer or a whiskey. Like, I can go there, but the more I can be in that place of in the moment and present, if I can put my feet on the ground and close my eyes and just breathe in and feel that in my body and then let that go, that meditative act of just being present again in here also has an amazing effect on, before I get on that Zoom call, shifting something in my mind so that when yesterday I'm talking to a woman in Australia whose path is so clearly aligned with mine, and she'd been thinking about so many similar things to what we're working on, that I'm able to sense that and feel that and know that that's aligned and I need to pursue that. Or if I'm on a call with somebody else where it's so clear that their values are not mine, they're going to be the one that takes me out to dinner and fires me, right? They're the ones that are going to encourage me to wash out all those investors that believed in me, that I can also say, I love you, I honor you, and I don't want anything to do with you, right?
Yeah, like that presence allows you to turn up the frequency on that tuning fork.
Yes, exactly.
That your body is, and being able to go back to making decisions from the heart.
Little C, little H.
Yeah.
Little, Like, there's big choice. Let's be 100% committed, 0% attached. And then there's also, okay, in this moment, this is what it looks like.
That's beautiful. Well, it's a heck of a punchline, and I think you've left us with a lot of them that we can continue to use in our own ways. And thank you for sharing your stories and helping convey some of those lessons where, sometimes it's nice to be able to hear it from somebody else instead of go through it by yourself.
The prayer I had this morning coming into this, the work I was doing with flow, kind of processing this, was if there's just somebody out there that this can be helpful for, if there's some element of my story that can be encouraging to them, they can help them find purpose, find center, pursue passion, fulfill their reason for being, that's just an amazing privilege to be here. So Drew, thanks for giving me the opportunity to share that. And I'm hopeful that may in fact happen.
Yeah. Well, time will tell. Thank you so much. This is a pleasure. And if one person hears this and finds value in it, then I think it was a success. And I know that I am that one person. So we'll chalk it up as a win.
From L to, how do you do the dub? Is it?
That works.
Is this dub? I still can't even do that hard thing. Like, I'm someday I'll get it figured out. Well, okay. We're going to flow or to Frozen, right?
Yeah. Cue the Frozen theme song.
Cue.
Alrighty. Be where your feet are, everybody. Thanks for listening. Adios.